there's been a lot of changes to educational and research institutions and to education policy since we got a new government last year in 2014, led by the Bharatiya Janata Party, the Hindu right-wing party that we call the BJP. I mean, you can see these changes on many fronts. First of all, the big public national research bodies, big universities, archives, the Indian Council for Historical Research, the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, these sorts of bodies have had new directors or new chairs take charge, and many of the new sort of leadership, the members of the leadership of these national bodies, which are very important for research work and for various kinds of academic activity in India. They are sympathetic overall to the ideology of the Hindu right. There's also been an effort to rethink national policies on language education. To what extent will school students look at Indian languages and learn Indian languages? What is going to be the place of English? How many foreign languages can they have access to at what levels of schooling? And what is most important is the role of Sanskrit, which is sort of the mother of most Indian languages, and it's the classical, one of the main classical languages of India. What role is this going to play in an ordinary school child's education? How much Sanskrit will a school child learn? Their agenda is to, as they say, Indianize education. But under this idea of Indianization, what happens is that very different versions of history, of Indian history, get introduced into the school syllabus, and they ultimately end up presenting a very different narrative of what kind of country India is, how has it reached its present, what kind of past it has had, what kind of role different communities have played in the course of history in coming together to form India. So overall, sort of the idea of what India is, can be pretty drastically revised based on what we are teaching our children about Indian history. Vigilance is definitely needed because you have examples in our regional neighborhood. A country like Pakistan, where they have a subject called Pakistan Studies, which is part of the school curriculum, which is really a kind of ideological education. It provides children with some sense of what Pakistan is and how it came to being, but this involves doing a fair amount of violence to the history of South Asia. India and Pakistan, as you know, came to be as modern nation states only in 1947. But prior to this, for centuries, for millennia, there's a very long history in which Islam plays a certain part, but so do other religions like Buddhism and Hinduism and so on. So under Pakistan Studies, there's a very particular kind of narrative that gets constructed. Similarly in China, education is ideological. I mean, it follows certain lines, which have to do with the communist state. In India, so far, we have had pretty liberal education policy, and Indians are routinely taught about their complex, plural, diverse, and non-homogeneous history, and the fact that India is comprised of many different cultures, many different ethnicities, many different languages, and so on, and that has always been the character of India and whatever has preceded India, the modern Indian nation, over many centuries. So this is something which is part of what we learn as we grow up in this country. That's been the case for the last 6-7 decades. Vigilance is absolutely essential because otherwise you end up with a very monochromatic version of our history, and you end up with a very ideologically loaded syllabus within the schools and colleges of this country, and then you have a whole new generation coming up of people who just don't know, who've never been exposed to the historical as well as the contemporary diversity, of this nation. I think there has to be a lot of criticism, a lot of dissent, and a lot of pushback from those who believe that, first of all, education is a key site, for not just for the culture wars, but really for the future, for how you form and shape the future. It's through the education of young people today, and through the construction of the kind of mindset of a new generation. So for those of us who believe that, but also those of us who are committed to a secular, liberal, democratic, diverse idea of India, I think, and especially those of us who are professionally in the field of education, in academics, scholars, researchers, writers, and journalists, and so on, we have to, stand up to this overbearing kind of ideological pressure from the government, where it can do certain things through the ministries, through the government bodies. It can appoint certain officials, but at the level of alerting citizens, awareness, building awareness in civil society, I mean, this is something that we can certainly do and that we must do. Is there a danger to future generations? Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I think, again, I go back to the example of, states where ideology is preponderant over democratic processes and democratic politics, such as China and even to a large extent Pakistan, which has had military rule for much of its independent history, and you can see that there are 1 or 2 or 3 generations already of young people, who grow up with a certain idea of what China is or what Pakistan is and what their histories are. And when they go out into a wider world, when they encounter other cultures, other nations, and other they enter into kind of global contexts, then they often need to re-educate themselves, in order to be better able to comprehend that, the world is not what their government taught it to be. So in India, because we are democratic, and I think we have a number of very strong institutions of the media, of the press, of education, of all kinds of disciplines in the social sciences, in the humanities, and so on. We need to be very, very vigilant, and we need to be alert about how these institutions are actually furthering, and preserving, dissent, diversity, and democracy, essentially.